So if you can go to the next slide, and I see the webinar box pop up on my screen now too, so that's great. So last week we got a decision from the commission. They approved our petition granting the waiver for both of those 2025 filings. They did make a finding that we demonstrated reasonable progress towards our clean energy and equity goals as was required under the law. And then I just want to note separately, but very related to the ISP effort, the commission has also begun a rulemaking process for this new ISP that will run through about July of next year. And so they kicked that off with a workshop, I believe it was near the end of June, and then are planning another workshop conversation likely for sometime this fall. If you could go to the next slide, please. Yep. So now what happens now? So we are rapidly pivoting towards this ISP approach, really building off the past year of efforts on the 2025 IRP. And I just want to note that as we move towards an ISP, this means involvement and engagement from not just the resource planning team, Philip's team, and my team on the clean energy side, but multiple departments at PSE will be even more engaged in resource planning than maybe they have been previously. So system planning, customer energy management, transmission, and others. And some of those leaders are here with us today to hear this kickoff conversation, which is great. So in the near term, we'll be engaging with each of our advisory groups, really to be asking questions about what we have planned so far and looking to get feedback on what topics we should really focus on in this ISP. We had an initial conversation last night with our equity advisor group around the ISP, and we will come back to them in September. Same thing for the Resource Planning Advisor Group. We'd like to start this conversation today, really get some feedback from you on the direction we're headed in, and hopefully have an even more detailed conversation in September. And all of this feedback, as well as feedback from our Conservation Resource Advisory Group too, will help inform the development of an ISP engagement work plan. And that was one of the commitments we made, was we would file one by the end of October. So you can think of this as being a similar kind of thing as what we have done previously for an IRP, where we pulled together a work plan of here is when we think we're likely to meet on the topics we plan to engage on. So like I said, we'll have more information at our next meeting with you in September to really talk through more potential topics, and just really look forward to continuing to work with you closely as we pivot towards this 27 ISP. If you can go to the next slide. Yeah.
If I could just break in and welcome, there's about 12 of you who are watching on the live stream. I know we started the live stream about 10 minutes late. Kara was the first presenter, and you only missed about 1 or 2 slides that we can catch you up on later. So apologies for that lag, and carry on, Kara.
Awesome. Okay. If we could go to the next slide. Yes, and happy to cover ground if we need to again. So one question may come to mind as we make this pivot to an ISP, which is whether we're planning to make any changes to the RPAG. And as of right now, we're not really planning any specific changes, but at the same time, we're working and learning as we go. For the Resource Planning Advisory Group, the charter was written with some flexibility in mind. So we don't at this time expect it will need major changes, but it may need a few adjustments, so we can certainly bring those back to you to talk about more as we go. I will note that, we originally envisioned working with all of you through the spring of 2025, and now with this ISP development, our timeline has shifted out a little bit. So we are sincerely hoping that you will all stick with us through the development of this ISP so that we can get to that first filing at the beginning of January in 2027. We really hope that this will continue to be a valuable use of your time. And I just also want to note that your participation and engagement to date has been really valuable to us, and that work is still valuable as we pivot to an ISP. We're not starting from scratch by any means. The work that we're building upon a lot of the work that we did in the 25 IRP. So the things you've shared with us will really inform us in where we go next. So I hope it has been time well spent, and it certainly has been helpful to us. So Sophie, I might pause before I go to the feedback slide, because it feels like a different thing.
Totally agree. So let's hear from RPAG members. Any reactions or questions from kind of the stage that Kara just set? you're welcome to come on camera and share your thoughts. So let's do Joel and then Lauren. Go ahead, Joel.
Sure. Thanks, Sophie and Kara. I guess kind of to the point you were just on, Kara, about building off of the feedback you've heard in the engagement so far with this group. I was wondering if PSE is looking back at comments that may have sort of resulted in a response, something like, that portion of the 2025 IRP has already been finished, so we will look at this in future planning cycles. If you're looking back at those kind of comments and reevaluating whether you can incorporate those in the 27 now with a little longer runway before the filing.
Yeah, Joel, thanks for that. I think that's a very reasonable, I'll call it a suggestion from you, or at least a question of whether we're looking at those. I think that there were some things, right, that felt like they were a little bit beyond the 25 timeline, and it definitely behooves us to revisit those and see if some of them are things that we can either do in this ISP, or we can at least make a little progress towards and then have teed up for the next ISP, because we think this is where we're going to be now as our planning framework going forward. So the short answer is yes, we'll revisit those comments of where we've said not quite yet and see if we're at a better place with this ISP or not. And we'll certainly happy to talk about those more as we get going.
Thanks.
Thanks, Joel, for that. Let's go to Lauren.
Yeah, I've been trying to think about how to phrase this question. I think it's sort of two parts. One is that we have the UTC undertaking a rulemaking at the same time that PSE is starting its ISP process. And so I'm curious, Kara, if you could speak a little bit to how you plan to navigate that, given that, we're not working with like a final set of rules, and we're unlikely to have a final set of rules within the timeline that you guys need in order to make some decisions about this plan. I'll just say it that way. So I'm hoping you can shed some light on how Puget plans to tackle that. And then secondarily, there is an initiative on the ballot, or that is likely to qualify for the ballot, to repeal 1589 and do some other things that I think would be really detrimental to decarbonization and electrification efforts in Washington State. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what assumptions you guys are thinking about using when it relates to decarbonization and electrification in the 2027 ISP. There was some discussion in the development of that legislation about, whether or not the assumptions in the decarbonization study should be the ones that we're using going forward, or whether or not there's more room for Puget to sort of start from updated assumptions. And I guess given this broader uncertainty that's out there, and you might not be able to answer this right now, Kara, but if you could just speak a little bit as to how you guys are moving forward, given some of that uncertainty.
Yes, those are both great questions, Lauren. We are navigating a bit of uncertainty. And so let me take your first question first, in terms of thinking about the dynamics with the rulemaking. We've been in this spot before on our journey with CETA in terms of rules that were being developed on it that informed the IRP that we were working on at the time as part of the CETA rulemaking that was then the foundation for the CEIP to follow. So I think we do have some lessons learned there in terms of really thinking about, what uncertainty is ahead for us and trying to move forward the analysis that needs to happen earlier with an eye towards, well, what could change, or what rules could throw a wrench in this analysis, and that would be problematic to the timeline or the scope or that piece of analysis. But there's a lot we don't know yet, and the rulemaking is so early. There's just not a lot of comfort or a lot of, I can't give you a great answer right now, except that we're spending a lot of time thinking about where could the rulemaking go and what pieces are we kind of ready or know more about now versus others. And it's very top of mind for us, but it's also really hard when we've just only had an initial workshop conversation so far. So I think we're going to have to continue to reevaluate where we are with the rulemaking as we head into the fall, because we are going to reach points in the timeline where we're going to have to make some assumptions, as you noted, and that gets harder to then adjust if the rules go in a different direction. So we're very mindful that we're going to have to manage that risk as best we can, but there's a lot of uncertainty. And I guess I almost have a similar answer to your second question, which is it's still fairly early, and we're really thinking about what the ballot initiative and other things might mean for the assumptions we make about various portfolios. And it may be that Philip or Wendy want to make a finer point on this than I can right now, but we're also mindful that depending on the outcome of that, we could be in a different place than where we are right now. And so that needs to factor into our thinking, but there's an awful lot of uncertainty of what that looks like right now. So
Philip, do you want to chime in on the uncertainty you're navigating?
Yeah,
it's like a common theme between us these days.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think on the repeal thing, what you're going to see in the presentation and the discussion today is what we're really focusing on is kind of how to reprocess and or how to restructure the planning processes to make the ISP work. So it's not so much about a lot of the details. So and the 1589 repeal is not like the it's not like the whole law goes out the window if it gets repealed. It's really line item strikeouts on electrification and whether PSE is able to incentivize electrification. And so even if that repeal is successful, we still have to do the ISP process. And there's a lot of things that don't get touched. I mean, I understand from the 50,000-foot policy level, it has a massive impact on the carbon emissions and what we would do to achieve those emissions reductions. But at a real high level, what we're talking about here is how do we slide these big planning processes around and reposition them in order to make this all work. And so like things like, for example, we still have to it doesn't change the conservation approach for on the electric side. It's still we have to in the ISP has to look at the 2% of load. Well, that doesn't get changed in the repeal. The 10% demand response flexibility, again, if those are commercially feasible, that doesn't change as a result, So a lot of this, in fact, like I said, even the ISP itself, we have to shift over to an ISP even if this succeeds, the ballot initiative passes. So it just changes what the details are, and that's kind of where we're at this point is looking at it at that level. So and I think that I think this is necessary even if that repeal is successful, because there's an enormous amount of changes that are going on in the industry, even just with CETA, just with the CCA, and I suppose even if the CCA doesn't even if that gets repealed, there's still going to be the local government actions on the gas side that are going to be issues. So, I think that the big changes that are happening in the industry, they're very different than what the past has been, right? The IRP world was good for when you're adding incremental resources to the mix. The CETA, as well as, the House Bill 1589, those are big changes. And that's why it's important, I think, to restructure the planning process. Because the requirements have changed so much. It's just gotten such a much bigger issue to deal with than it used to be. So yeah. Even if it does get repealed, all this work is still going to be necessary by law, not even just because we think it's important. So.
Thanks, Philip. I know that Summer and others had a little trouble hearing you, so I'll work with you offline on maybe sorting that out. I see Lauren's hand. Is it okay to go back to Lauren and then Kara, we can wrap with you? Great.
Yeah,
Lauren, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm saying this more, I think some of the Puget folks have already heard me say this, so this is more for others that might be listening. I do think that one of the main purposes of doing an ISP was to try to get at the intersection, the intersectional issues around electrification and how does the gas system and the electric system respond to one another, given the need to decarbonize in the most cost-effective way, and how do we treat electrification as a solution for decarbonization? And I guess, just so folks know what you're going to hear from us, is that obligation exists regardless of what happens with the initiative. The initiative does not repeal electrification as a thing that the company should be considering. It repeals specific language around how to do that in this bill. But it doesn't remove electrification as a thing that you need to be thinking about or looking at or planning for. So I just want to be really clear that that is going to be, I think, continue to be a top priority for advocates who are participating in this conversation, regardless of what happens with the initiative. So
no, thank you for your comments, Lauren. That's great feedback. And just know that, we're also looking at this as a holistic decarbonization plan across gas and electric, and that remains regardless of what the outcome is of the ballot. So that's where we're headed with this ISP, and we'll be able to get into more details, I think, about assumptions as we get into future conversations this fall. But we'll do the best we can to manage through all this uncertainty and work with you all on that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for the questions and the kind of the heads up from you, Lauren, about where your thinking's at, and for Kara taking those questions. I'm going to recommend that we shift now to thinking about the feedback that PSE has received, and then we'll have plenty of time for more ISP conversations. So go ahead.
Sounds great. If we can go to the next slide. So this is really just to recap what we've been hearing as Sophie, I think you called it our roadshow that we have been doing with the public, with our equity advisory group and this advisory group, really looking for feedback on our approach to equity analysis in the context of our resource planning. We'll be revisiting this and diving deeper into some of this feedback as we work on the ISP, but we just wanted to recap what we heard during that series of conversations. So we heard a lot of themes, and it was really great to get such robust feedback from this advisory group, and our equity advisory group seemed to generally be supportive of the updates we were proposing. And just as a reminder, that included, introducing a more qualitative assessment into looking at potential burdens and benefits when we examine generic electric resources. That was one part. And then also we were looking at updating the scoring methodology in our portfolio equity assessment. And so again, it felt like we heard some general support in the direction we were headed. We also heard concerns, and the main concerns we heard were some concerns around the metrics we were using and how they might differ in their relative impacts. And we heard from several parties some interest in a more nuanced approach beyond the binary scoring method. So we heard feedback suggesting weighting the metrics. We also heard feedback potentially using a more granular scoring scale than the 0-1. And we also heard concerns regarding the metrics, and not necessarily, the feedback wasn't necessarily consistent across different folks. So some folks said that the metrics we had might be too correlated. We could be measuring the same thing multiple times. And then some said we should have additional metrics to measure, and others were saying, well, maybe you should scale back the number of metrics you have to really just focus on those customer benefit indicators that we had been using. So we'll be taking all that under advisement, and like I said, revisiting that as we work on the ISP. And then on the gas utility side, as a reminder, we were starting this conversation a bit earlier for the gas utility. we proposed a new equity assessment that was at least modeled after how we had done it on the electric side. And then similar to the feedback we heard on the electric IRP, we were encouraged to reconsider how we score different gas resources, and then encouraged to ensure that there's uniqueness in our metrics so that we would reduce that risk of double counting. And then we heard interest in aligning the metrics we're using on the electric side with the ones we use on the gas side. So, I mean, I think I've already covered this well, but we'll be revisiting this strategy, and really thinking more about this feedback that we received. So it was a valuable conversation, but now as we pivot towards an ISP, we'll certainly be unpacking a lot of these themes more and thinking about where we go from here. So thank you for all this great feedback. It's been really helpful.
Great. Thanks so much, Kara. Any reactions to the equity analysis approach and what PSE has been hearing? Okay. Not seeing or hearing any. Oh, Kate, please.
Hey there, thank you. I was curious if there's a feedback report available yet on kind of seeing what the different responses were in a little bit more detail on the equity analysis. I know Renewable Northwest and Climate Solutions put together some pretty detailed comments on this, and we're just kind of curious to hear where other people are landing.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kate. I know we have been working on one, and I'm pausing to see if one of my colleagues knows what the status of that feedback report, whether it's out or whether it's almost out. So stay tuned. We'll let you know, because I know we have been working on our side. I can't recall whether it's been out and published. So we'll get back to you shortly if that's okay.
Great. It looks like Katie may have found it, so maybe it is out.
Okay. I thought we had put it out, but sometimes I've seen it and it hasn't been published yet. So awesome. It is out. My team's confirmed that. So great.
Excellent. Glad that was able to be sorted out. So Philip is left the meeting and rejoined to see if that will potentially help on this side. So we're going to give him a few minutes for the dots to clear, or a few moments, I think. And then we can probably turn it over to Philip. But while that's happening, were there any other reactions or thoughts about feedback on the equity analysis? Not hearing any. Will, you can very slowly move to the next slide as Philip tries to call in with his phone. So the next piece is Philip is going to talk about the ISP strategy at a slightly more detailed level. And you can go now to the next slide as well. And this is where we will just pause. There we go. So in the chat earlier on, I pasted the link to HB 1589, kind of the text. So for those of you who get your kicks reading actual legislation, you can do that there. But in a moment, once Philip is connected, he's going to talk about those requirements. Also in the chat, you'll see are the feedback reports that Kate was asking about, both the 612 feedback report and the 66 feedback report. And it looks like, Philip, you're connected. You can press *6 on your phone to come off of mute. See if that works. Or I might be all powerful and allow you to be able to do that. *6. There, you look good. Talk.
Okay, does that work? Are you hearing me better?
I think so. Let's check in with you, Summer. Summer, you were having the issues. Philip, can you just say a few words, sing a few bars?
I don't know if I can sing a few bars, but I'll make believe I sang a few bars. That work?
That sounds good. How's that sounding to you, Summer?
That's better. Thank you.
Very good. All right,
Okay.
Philip, I did your intro slide. Take it away.
Okay. So really kind of high level, going through here, what are the objectives? Obviously, we have to comply with the law about integrated system plans. We have to be looking at scenarios that achieve the gas and electric utility emission reductions that are equal to to PSE's proportional share of the emission reductions under the statewide reduction limits. And then I already mentioned earlier that there's the achieve the 2% electric load conservation targets That's unless the commission finds a higher target is cost effective, or if it is not commercially or technically feasible. The low income programs, again, I already did mention the demand response. That's about 10%. That's 10% unless unless more is cost effective or it's not commercially feasible. And then there's also, it needs to include the 10-year Clean Energy Action Plan. So why don't we go to the next slide? And so the way that we're looking at the overall objective here for the ISP, it really is to develop consistent, equitable, and actionable plans across customer strategies, energy supply, and energy delivery to achieve the clean energy targets and the targeted greenhouse gas emission reductions while maintaining a reliable and affordable energy system. So that's kind of the overall goal, right? It's a little different. I have next slide. We'll talk about compare contrast with the IRP a little bit, but high level, what's really different about the ISP is that we're using these processes to look at what's the best way to reduce emissions, and we're also looking at it consistently between we have to have consistency between delivery planning and energy supply planning, kind of pulling all those pieces together, looking at it at the same time, or the same set of assumptions.
Philip, I see Ezra's hand. Ezra, do you want to come off of mute?
Yeah, Philip, we're gotten through a lot of stuff here. Can we look at the previous slide again for 1 second? Sure. So you said in the second bullet there, includes scenarios that achieve gas and utility electric reductions equal to the proportional. So I guess that's not saying that there's a specific statutory requirement that gas and electric do a proportionate share of reductions, right? It just is a planning requirement. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, especially for the ISP, we will be looking at scenarios that can achieve the pro rata share of our emission reductions, right? So I'm not exactly sure if you're asking is that what we are required to do, or is this what we're required to plan for?
That's the question. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, because I have to do all this analysis, and whether we execute, what exactly we execute. I think the commission has discretion over what they're going to approve for us to do. So if the commission were to look at that hitting the pro rata share, if they were to find that was going to be unreasonably costly or something, that they can approve, they can accept our plan as it's filed, or order us to change it. So I don't know if that helps you, Ezra.
Well, it's a strange requirement, which is why it took me a little while of head scratching. For example, if you have electrification as part of your strategy, you're not going to get pro rata share of reductions from electric and gas. I just don't understand if that's a statutory requirement, if it's a statutory requirement to include this scenario, or I don't, what that bullet is trying to express.
Perhaps Kara has some thoughts about the requirement aspect. Kara?
Yeah, I mean, Ezra, these are great questions. I mean, we really are reading it as a planning requirement, but I think there's still more to come on how we navigate all the details in the bill as we develop this ISP. So, I mean, I do read this language, maybe putting my lawyerly hat on for a second as a planning requirement, but I think we've got a lot of details to sort out within how we navigate this ISP. So we'll be talking more about all of this, I believe, in the weeks to come.
All right. Should be interesting. Thank you very much.
Ezra,
definitely not boring.
No one has a boring job at PSE right now. Ezra, you're right. There is a lot of text on the side. There's a lot there. Is there anything else you want to unpack, or anything else RPAG members want to unpack here? Okay.
I mean, we didn't see these slides I don't think we got them. Did we get them in advance?
Gosh, I hope so. I sent them out on Friday. I hope that you got them, Ezra,
Okay,
as a part of my email. So I hope others did
well, I
too.
missed it. Thank you anyway. But,
Yeah, it still was quick turnaround because the decision was only on Thursday, and we wanted to repurpose the time because well, January 27 will be here before we know it.
indeed.
So
Terrifying.
Thanks.
Great. So Lauren, I see your hand now too.
I'll be brief. I just wanted to posit, I think that the language around the proportional share of emissions reductions is really getting at the need for both the gas system and the electric system to reduce their emissions consistent with the statewide GHG limits. So it's a pretty steep reduction, particularly on the gas system, that's different than what we've seen in previous IRPs. So I hope that is helpful.
No, I understand. I mean, it's just that is a very, very strict constraint. And honestly, to my view, regarding efficient reduction in emissions, it makes no sense to put that. I mean, maybe as a scenario for, illustrative purposes, it would be useful, but it sure does put a straitjacket on what the utilities can if you actually had to have proportional emissions reductions, that would be a problem, I think, in my mind.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Ezra. I do want to make sure we have time for Jen to give her piece. So Philip, let's go back to you and let's stick on the objective slide here. So take it away, Philip.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I kind of mentioned this one already. So unless there's any questions, we can go to the next slide. And as we transition to that slide, I think that the dialogue that we just had was great because y'all are hitting on exactly the same questions that we have, and thinking about what scenarios have to look like, what do they need to look like, what does proportional share mean, and what's achievable. All of those kinds of things are all things that we'll have to deal with. And I kind of think of those as sort of almost assumptions or objectives, right? We have to build, what we're going to really kind of talk about today is how to build the planning process to be able to answer those questions, right? So independent of what the emission reduction target is, we have to realign our planning functions in order to answer those kinds of questions, right? So I can look at different emission reduction objectives. In order to do that, I have to realign all of these different planning processes. And we started, I'll just give you a little bit of background. We really started this in earnest a year ago, because as I mentioned, we see the future is looking much more complicated than the past, a lot bigger sets of changes coming on. And just the way this used to work, the way our process used to work is the IRP, then the conservation planning and the delivery planning were all they're kind of in the order I just laid them out. You kind of do the IRP, it would give you, kind of tell you what the conservation targets ought to be as an output of the optimization model. It's not the only way to do it. It is the way that we've done it in order to ensure, right? The purpose of the IRP was to make sure that we're looking at demand side resources and supply side resources on an equal footing. That was the purpose of the IRP world, right? And that was a great world. At least Elizabeth and I, maybe a few others, we rode the whole journey. We went from least cost plan through IRP, and we've done our last IRP, right? So we watched the whole complete life cycle of the IRP policy. We wrote it. But with the new process, with the new process, it really requires us to have the discussion about the customer strategy pieces much more upfront. Because what we used to do was, the IRP would get the conservation targets, then delivery planning would do their planning, and then we would pick up whatever the impacts from delivery planning would go into the next IRP cycle. So it was kind of just linear in that way. But with so much needing to change, these processes, the delivery, especially the delivery and the energy supply planning, kind of have to happen concurrently, or as concurrently as possible. And as we struggled through this for the last year to try and figure out how to realign the planning processes, we had a few different consultants come in, help us out. We were kind of sorting it out, figuring it out. I don't know if you're aware, but the Salt River Project, they've actually done an ISP, and they're an electric only co-op, but they were the first ones to really do a full ISP. I think they've done some stuff in Hawaii as well. But we kind of developed what Jen will walk you through. And then finally, SRP got to a point where we can engage with them and get a lot more detailed discussion. I went to a conference and presented on a panel with the folks from SRP. We've had some follow-up discussions with them. And they've kind of realigned their processes very similar to the way we're doing it, except the difference is you layer in the gas utility, we have to make that consistent too. And what I've found really exciting about it is what it really requires us to do is that customer strategy piece much more upfront. So rather than having go like the old school, I have a conservation or a load forecast before conservation, then the optimization model tells you how much conservation to do. Well, it doesn't work anymore because that won't work because the delivery planning and resource planning need to happen at the same time. And what's really great about moving the customer strategy planning piece before those two is it then allows us to have a lot more detailed and focus, frankly, a lot more focus on those developing alternative customer strategies. And we can get into those things a lot deeper because those pieces are where there's a lot of equity in implications to the customer strategy stuff. And if we can focus on that up front, that can be a lot more solid that we develop some alternative customer strategies and then bring them into the other two planning functions with energy supply and delivery. We can analyze those together so that we're really kind of starting with it. I think of it as it's really a customer focused planning process where we're focusing on how the customer energy usage, the demand side resources will change, and then how to wrap planning around achieving those customer outcomes. So because of needing to make those changes, this big process changes that Jen will kind of walk us through. So, and then it has to include, the ISP has to include specific actions like a CEIP. And now the commission has to approve the ISP. In the IRP, they don't. And in fact, they didn't, now it doesn't matter what they did or didn't do. It doesn't matter, at least for us. Maybe the other utilities it does, but for us, that's very different. But, that's really what I think for me is the key takeaway is as we look at, different carbon reduction scenarios, you're realigning all these different planning processes. And something I think that's going to be important a couple things important to recognize. One, I think this first ISP is going to be really good. It is not going to be perfect. Right? As Lauren mentioned, we don't even have rules. And the rulemaking isn't even going to be done on a timeline that will allow us to do a whole lot of changes on the back end. So I think the commission understands that and will kind of have some flexibility in terms of, we'll get a really good ISP out. It won't be perfect. The next one will be even better. And then I think the other thing to keep in mind is we would still be doing the some of the types of traditional sensitivity type work, because there's things in energy supply that really might not have much impact on delivery. Like, so if I do, solar in Eastern Washington, or I do wind in Eastern Washington, that doesn't really have a big impact on our distribution system, right? So there's sensitivities we can be looking at in the individual, like customer strategy planning, energy supply planning, and delivery planning. We can be looking at different sensitivities within each of those three big planning functions. If you want to start doing big scenarios that impact all of those things, an ISP does not make the planning process more nimble. It does not. It makes it bigger and more encompassing. And that's not fast and nimble, right? So it really requires us to have a lot more thought on the front end of how much can we bite off, given that we're now doing this sort of consistent planning between these three big planning functions. So that's just something to keep in mind as we go into the process. But I think a lot of the things that we're going to be doing, as you all mentioned, we're doing a rulemaking while we're trying to build this new framework, and trying to build a framework big enough and adequate to be able to capture whatever it is we need it to do. And my guess is, as we have conversations with y'all and the other advisory groups, and we're going through the rulemaking, we're all going to be kind of going through this journey together, and learning and refining and things of that nature. So okay. So
thank you, Philip. So here's your cheat sheet. Here are the 5 major differences between an integrated system plan and what the world of IRPs and CEIPs look like. Any reactions or questions at this juncture? All right. Well, thank you, Philip. This actually was very useful for me as I'm wrapping my head around this alongside you all. You can go to the next slide, please, Will. And so I know in the past, RPAG members, and just as an aside, welcome, John. Thanks for joining us here. That you all, we've used these, online whiteboards as a way for you to start taking notes, so that when we move into the discussion in a little bit, you can have some thoughts written down on virtual paper. So Kim, can I ask you to put the mural board to hosts and panelists? And so while Jen is speaking, there's a section about, the different topics that you all as RPAG members are most interested in. And there's some instructions there, as well as there's some sticky notes having to do with opportunities and challenges. Jen will talk to all of those things. And when Jen is done, we'll open that mural board and you'll have the chance to add to it and make some decisions. So with that preamble aside, Jen, do you want to take us away?
Yeah, sounds good. Okay. So good afternoon, Jen Colson. Next slide. Okay, so I think Kara and Philip started us off really well regarding why we're doing the ISP and where we see it going. And just to kind of reiterate a few things that they brought up as I try to walk you through the process that we think would unfold here, is we are incorporating a lot of lessons learned, not only just from our past engagements on integrated resource planning, but also in most recent, the changes in the engagement process have been incredibly helpful in understanding what's really important to people. And this customer strategy idea that Philip mentioned, I'll walk through in a bit more detail for you, but has really, it's just become more and more important as we've dived into this. And we really should be planning the utility around all these customer programs. And not that we don't plan around the customer programs and end uses, but really make that more clear and articulate that better across externally and internally as we go through this together. As Philip mentioned, we've discussed the ISP framework with Salt River Project and really dove into what were your lessons learned, things that didn't work out well, how can we take what you've learned and iterate on that for us. And so that's what we're really doing and how we set this up. And we're also using, obviously, the HB 1589 language and the rules. As we've mentioned a number of times, the timing isn't ideal from the rulemaking process and the fact that we have to start an analysis before that's complete. But as Philip and Kara mentioned, we're going to do our best to mitigate those potential changes in rules to ensure that whatever we're setting up in this ISP is going to be, good enough to meet this 27 filing, but we're going to have that future iterations and lessons learned. So on the next slide, kind of just articulates that. So, today we're in these separate resource planning processes. We're moving rather quickly towards this 27 ISP. And it's going to be, like Philip said, it's going to be really good. It's going to be exciting, but it's not going to be perfect. And we recognize that, and we're going to work towards that for future ISP plans. Next slide. You're probably tired of us mentioning the timeline without showing you the timeline. So here's a timeline at a really high level, and across the top, you can see the different milestones that we've identified. So the bill, HB 1589, calls out the January 1st, 27 filing date, which is on the far right of the screen. We put a tentative draft filing of ISP in September to show you, and a draft preferred portfolio on the screen just to articulate where those results would have to be completed to start discussing with this forum and other external forums on the results of the ISP in itself. You can see the interested parties and customer engagement along the entire time frame. And what's I find interesting about this timeline is it's about 3 years. If we start today, a typical IRP we're working on for about 2 years. And I don't know about you guys, but it feels quick. It is a lot to cover. So we're adding a lot more scope in about a year time frame. So it's a lot more ground to cover, as Philip was mentioning. And in the purple bar, you can see the commission rulemaking for the ISP is highlighted there. And the importance of that is, as you go down, you can see that the analysis and modeling is actually already starting. So that's why we're saying if we don't start, then we can't hit the draft results and then the final filing. So it's important that we get going. It's not ideal, but we'll work through it together and get a good answer at the end and file that ISP in January of 27. Any questions on the timeline before I go to the next one?
And let's pause here for a moment because there's a lot of good information.
Yeah.
Questions about what Jen described about what needs to start happening now, regardless, and what needs to essentially be wrapped up by fall of 2026. Okay.
We're definitely going to get some more details, though.
Yeah. It doesn't look like people have questions. You can carry on.
Okay. So go to the next one. So I'm going to attempt to walk you through essentially 3 different process flows of how we were thinking about approaching this ISP. So hopefully by the third one, it starts clicking, and that's where we're really interested in your thoughts and feedback on what we've laid out today. And then we have some other prompting questions for discussion as well. So, but as Philip mentioned, this is considering those lessons learned I discussed earlier and that interaction with Salt River Project. So we feel pretty good about what we have on the screen, but we're still interested in feedback and your input. So when we think about an ISP, we're going to start on the far left, and we really want to set this up aligning on goals and objectives across the ISP, so it's all marching in the same direction, right? And we want to consider the Clean Energy Transformation Act requirements. We want to look at our decarbonization goals, and we really want to do this together from the customer and PSC's clean energy goals and priorities, and come at it from a front. And then we move into the ISP itself, which is that center circle. And you can see in the very center is the customer program needs. And we think this is really important. So we're going to really focus on what are the customer end uses, and where do we see customers evolving over time, and what do they want to be able to use, and how can we build our utility around that? So you can see in the white around that is our planning cycle. So how do we build our clean energy needs, our PSE system, like the pipes and the wires, our regional transmission investments, and our gas and electric demands to meet what the customer program needs are. We'll be doing all of this collectively with engagement with our advisory boards and interested parties and the public, the RPAG being a very key part of that process, as well as considering equity across all of those different functions and really incorporating the 4 tenets. The output of the ISP is a system plan. So it's an integrated customer strategy. We're going to ensure it has equitable distribution of benefits and reduction of burdens and specific actions to achieve those clean energy goals and targets. Okay.
Yeah, let's pause here again. There's a lot on this one, and as a visual person, I appreciate seeing how it all is laid out. Ezra, go ahead.
It's really kind of a comment. I mean, Phil and then you have discussed customer needs, which is kind of an interesting concept, because customer needs are for energy services. I just think it's really important that we keep that in mind and maybe even keep that as part of the documentation, that it's energy services and not specific forms of energy. And is that what you have in mind when you talk about customer needs, or is there an assumption that their actual needs for specific forms of energy are fixed?
I think it's a good call out. It's a good point. I think it goes beyond that a little bit too, just as we think about the new technology and the ability to go back and forth on a grid. So how do we set up the distribution system to accommodate, batteries at home so it can feed the home and come back on the system in a timely manner, and the system set up that way. It's not a burden later for that to come in. We've planned it out, right? Like that's a specific, easy example of what we were thinking.
So it's anticipating in the world we're, working toward what the energy needs and technology is going to be to make sure that it's sort of it fits within the plan without major retooling, essentially.
Yeah, kind of future-proof within reason, right? But yeah, with future-proofing the system a bit better and painting that picture of so we're all aware of where we want to go, and we can outline the plans and determine the best path to get there.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thanks for the question, and Jen, thanks for introducing me to the term future-proofing. It's a good one. Anything else? Anything else on the ISP inputs and outputs for now? Nope. All right, next slide, Jen.
Okay, so this is going to take us a little deeper, and then the next slide is even deeper. So if you have questions, the next slide might answer it, or it might make you more confused. I guess we'll find out. So this is the process flow and how we envision stepping through this together. So on the far left, we're looking at aligning the planning assumptions and scenarios. Like Philip said, because this is such a robust process, it'll be really important to be mindful and really thoughtful about how we set these up, because the scenarios will have to go across all the different areas, whereas there could be sensitivities within each one of these that don't necessarily impact one another, if that makes sense. So we're going to start by aligning those assumptions, developing the scenarios, and then the next column, the second column, identify customer strategies and load forecasts. That's that customer strategy development work. We're going to look at conservation and other customer end uses and develop what are those strategies within the scenarios that we developed that make sense and are economical and technically feasible. Then we're going to apply that to the load forecast up front. So this is probably more specific to conservation. So like Philip mentioned, traditionally, as you know through our process, conservation is an output of the resource plan. This is having it be more of an input. So we would take that conservation off of that system level load forecast. And then if there's customer programs where they're generating loads, so like net metering or something, that would be an input to the resource plan as a generator, right? But that would all be up front. So that allows that third column, the develop distribution, transmission, and resource plans, to all run together. And that saves a significant amount of time and ensures we're all aligned across the board on our scenarios and assumptions. So we would run that load forecast with those customer strategies included for the different scenarios for gas, transmission and distribution investments, electric distribution investments, electric transmission investments, both within PSE service area and regionally, if that is something that we need to invest in, and then gas and electric energy supply. All of those different models will create costs, right, for each scenario. So we'll have a total cost across all those different planning frameworks. And what's really important, we think, as we focus on this customer end use, is not only considering where customers may be going, but ensuring we understand what it means for a customer from a customer bill impact perspective. So we would take all of that work and then look at it from a customer bill perspective. We have to identify some risks for each of these scenarios and how we'll be mitigating those in some form of decision framework, because the ISP is creating actions. So we'd file the ISP, and then the post ISP column is really looking at executing on those customer programs that we determine within the plan, acquisitions, if we have a need for generation or other things we need to acquire, and then tracking. We have to show progress of how we're meeting those actions that we identified. And all of this would be, communicated and discussed with you guys in greater detail across the interested parties and public engagement. Today, we just really have the high level process flow, as you guys have alluded to. There's a lot of details to work out, but this is the high level flow. And then my next slide is very similar. It just has a bit more detail and context that may be helpful. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, let's pause, because I see, Summer has a question. Summer asked, is the intent of looking at customer bill estimates to look at all customer classes? Thoughts, Jen?
That's a good question. So something we've worked through, so in the decarbonization studies that we've created, we have looked at different classes of customers. It is challenging when you get into C&I, commercial and industrial customers, just because of how variable those impacts are depending on the type of customer. So I think the intention would be that we'd try and show some level of residential and C&I customer, but it would just be illustrative, really, right? Because it all depends on the type of customer and their usage and all those sorts of things.
Summer, carry on, Summer.
Yeah, I just wanted to pop in really fast. I mean, I don't have a solution for this at this point, but I think, thinking back to the decarbonization study, that was, appreciate the work that PSE did to try to get that information, appreciate that it's complicated. But I also think that this is more important than ever to really understand those impacts. And so I'm hoping we can just continue the conversation and try to brainstorm and work collaboratively on the art of possible here, because I do think it's problematic to have a plan and then say, well, we understand what this means for residential customers, but we really don't know what it means for commercial and industrial. And I know it's a harder question, but I don't think it's a less important question. So I just want to put a pin in really wanting to continue the conversation and work through those issues.
Thanks for that, Summer. Yeah, any reactions, Jen?
No, I appreciate that. It's a good point. And like you said, we will definitely investigate that as we pull together this ISP in more detail.
Yeah. Joel, please.
Thanks. Yeah. Hi, Jennifer. I had a question, I guess, on this slide. It seems like we're progressively kind of diving a little bit deeper into what PSE is expecting to do for the development of the ISP. And I just wanted to note a sort of disconnect, I think, between the last slide and this one. The last one had sort of this overarching, energy justice, equity, recognition, procedural, distributive, and restorative. And I didn't see quite how that translated into the next slide and where equity comes into the picture in the various steps that you're laying out on slide 25. So 24. Yeah, we're here now. So I was hoping you could expand a little more on what you're expecting to do along this, understanding that the public engagement and interested party engagement is part of that, but not necessarily the whole picture when it comes to ensuring equitable outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for pointing that out. They're draft for a reason. We'll make edits. That's not meant to be exclusive. So equity is embedded in a lot of these steps along the way. So we'll have, I think, actually probably considerations across the board, especially within all the different planning functions themselves. So customer strategy will have a full equity analysis on their piece, gas distribution planning, electric distribution, electric transmission, gas and electric supply. They'll all have equity. And then together in that decision framework, we need to find a way to look at things from the equitable benefits as well. So that'll all be in there inclusively. It's not, like you mentioned, that's a good point. It's not called out on this specific diagram. And I'm not sure if it's on the next one either. I guess we'll see. But
there's
that's
a little piece, it touches on it on the next one slightly.
Oh,
so
okay.
I think, yeah, you can call it out.
On the next.
Great.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah, let's transition here and just for the folks that have the mural link, you'll see it's just a copy of this image. So as Jen is talking through these different topics connected to the ISP, if you're like, oh, yes, I would love to have a meeting that focuses on that, just drag a little purple thumbs up next to the bullet point. You can zoom in with your wheel. And if Jen is touching on a point that just doesn't feel appropriate or applicable to you all as RPAG members, there's like the thinky face, and you can drag that next to that item as well. So Jen, talk us through these.
Yeah, so this is just another level deeper, as Jill mentioned. And so I'll just kind of talk through it again, and hopefully it starts making sense. So on the far left, again, we're really starting with those goals, the assumptions, the targets, and to be more specific, like these are some things that we're thinking of when we talk about those constraints. We're thinking of the clean energy targets, customer partnerships and opportunities, compliance obligation, reliability and safety goals and requirements. And then we'll pull together these scenarios. And when we think of the scenarios, because they are going to impact more areas and they have to be more robust, we need to consider economic factors, potential policies, and things that could be changing, like we talked about the repeal, like all those different things. Any other risks that we see with the plans that we have pulled together, and the demand forecast for those potential variations. All of that information would feed into this customer strategy box, and which is a pretty hefty box. We're talking about the conservation potential assessment and bringing that assessment down to even more granularity, geographical, to really help with that targeted electrification conversation. We're looking at distributed energy resources, demand response, targeted electrification, electric vehicles, conservation. Here, equity would be considered across all of those programs as they develop that strategy, if to be more specific for you. And then all of that would feed into the demand forecast. This is gas and electric, by the way. The whole thing is gas and electric. So then we got these demand forecasts, and like I mentioned, conservation would come off of those forecasts at the beginning, whereas net metering would be a generator that we would use as an input in the planning model on the right. So when we get to the third column, all of those planning functions are running at the same time. And that'll really help with the timeline that we showed on the prior slide. And each of these are really looking at 10-year investment needs. The electric system is looking at non-wire alternatives. And specifically on the electric distribution system, we're really diving into that distributed energy resources with the heat map of where's the most benefit to the system and where should we try and locate those things for that action plan. And then when you get to gas system integrity, they're also looking at 10-year investments, and we're considering non-pipe alternatives, one of those being targeted electrification. And that geographical level of analysis will really help inform maybe where there's targeted electrification opportunities for them. We have the transmission planning and strategy development. Again, 10-year investments, non-wire alternatives, all the things. And then the electric and gas resource planning, which is typically been the focus of this group, right, for the RPAG. And that's still all going to be the same material. So we're still doing resource adequacy. We're still doing all the things that are required to develop a real robust utility scale plan. And that'll incorporate those customer strategies. And then when you move to the fourth column, the preferred alternative selection framework, this is looking across all of those different planning frameworks, trying to figure out the best way to optimize. And we need to consider equitably distribution of benefits and reduction of burdens. I can't talk. The clean energy goals and targets, our greenhouse gas emission reductions, right? Again, diving deeper into the geographic targeted items for gas and electric system planning on the DER opportunities and locations, as well as the targeted electrification opportunities. And then we're looking at utility scale generation. So how do we align with RFPs? How are we doing to meet resource adequacy and other long haul transmission needs or investments that PSE needs to make? And the output, the fifth column, is that that customer plan. It could be a certificate of necessity. It could be, it's going to have the clean energy action plan for both gas and electric. So this isn't just electric focused anymore. And those clean energy actions are going to consider equity. We're going to have the ISP submittal, and then as part of those different scenarios and outputs would be the customer bill impacts that we talked about.
Nice work. Yeah, talking through all that. And I'm seeing some of you as visitors, and correct, choose visitors when you enter the mural, starting to drag some of the thumbs up around topics. We're going to have a whole discussion about it, but now is your chance to ask Jen some clarifying questions about what you're seeing on the screen here. Questions, concerns, comments on these specific topics? I'll do the teacher thing of just saying questions. Kate, Lauren, Katie, Summer, Jim, Froy, Stefan, Ezra, Joel, or John. Anyone have? There we go. I knew that would. Lauren, go ahead.
Thanks, Sophie. Jennifer, I really appreciate this overview. This sounds, incredibly ambitious, but I think also I'm just excited to see the way that Puget is thinking about this. I think you guys touched on all of the pieces that I was hoping to see here. So just really appreciate it. And I feel like I don't have any specific input on this today, but might take a little bit more time and get you some feedback before you finalize this draft. And thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate the overview.
Thanks for weighing in, Lauren. So for Jen's last, Summer, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I guess, are we continuing the RPAG tradition of allowing for comments after this meeting? I do think it would be helpful,
absolutely,
particularly digest this slide and really compare it to, what's in the bill. So yeah, I just want to make sure that we have that opportunity and that my silence here is not interpreted in any particular way.
Okay, great. No, Summer, the feedback form will close on July 24th. So you all will have about a week or so to gather your thoughts. And if you wouldn't mind, Kim, just repasting that feedback form link into the chat so people have it handy. Yeah. So Jen, just in your last 5 or so minutes here, if you want to go to the opportunities and challenges section, and this might spark some of you in that mural board over to the right, after you're done playing with those thumbs up signs, there's a question here about what other opportunities and challenges do you see with the ISP? As Jen is talking, if something's coming to mind, just click on one of the sticky notes and add your thoughts, and we'll come back to it later. So next slide, Will, and go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, so that was, thanks for your guys' thoughts and input. That's really helpful. And where you're sitting, it's definitely something to consider, Summer. So the bill there's a lot in there. And so this is pretty high level, like processy. And then there's some really specific things, specific asks within the bill for analysis within the planning requirements. So that'll definitely come. And I think we'll get more and more granular as time goes on, but it's important. I think it's good to highlight those things just to make sure we're all on the same page. So there's a lot of opportunities and challenges, as we mentioned. And something that I think Sophie is trying to push us towards is, the engagement opportunities, they're extensive, but they're time constrained. So as I showed you, this is really expanding the scope of what the RPAG initially was looking at. And so how would what are the topics you want to dive into deeper? What are the topics you're okay at a higher level? Because I just think realistically, we're not going to have time. We'll be together way too much for your liking, probably, to dive into all these details. So we'll have to pick and choose a little bit here, but ensuring that, you have the granularity you need to feel confident with what we've pulled together. The timeline's aggressive, but it's necessary to hit that 27 filing date. And I think it's good, filing something that's good and on the right path and direction is better than trying to perfect it. I think we'd never file it if that was the goal for that first one. So I think that's a good start for us. And it's our first ISP, and we'll have examples and lessons learned, like I just said, and we'll continue to iterate and make progress, making room for that rulemaking and ensuring that we can be flexible and a little bit more future looking and figuring out where those rules may go so that we can ensure to adopt those in the analysis to the best of our ability. So that's really all I have on the plan at this point.
Yeah. Lauren, please.
Sorry. I did just take a bite and then raise my hand. So one thing, just going back real quick, Jen, on process.
Yep.
The one thing I didn't notice in there, and I know this came up a little bit in the rulemaking workshop, is pipeline replacement plans. And I know, it's actually been a while since Puget has done a pipeline replacement plan, since you guys don't use, you haven't been using the CRM for that. I'm just curious if you, to me, this just raises questions about what types of investments do we categorize as safety related on the gas system versus growth related or other related. And, I can understand if you're not prepared to answer this question today, but I do think that will be something that we need to kind of work through in this process. Is what does that mean if we're carving out safety related investments from the ISP? So I don't know if there's anything you can speak to, or maybe Philip or somebody.
Yeah, good question. I'm going to punt it to Wendy. That's why she's here.
Well, everybody can hear me okay? Sound check? Yeah?
Yep. Sounds
okay. Good. So Lauren, thanks for that question. We are actually currently in the process of preparing a letter that we will file to the rulemaking docket to respond to some of the questions that were raised during the rulemaking on this issue. So I expect, within the next week or so, we'll be filing that. I think the intention is not to carve out everything, but there are some discrete purposes for the safety plans that motivate us to want to keep those safety plans in place. And so hopefully our comments in the docket will provide some further clarification on what we're seeking to do by maintaining those separate plans, but also make sure that the information that's needed for the ISP is incorporated in the ISP.
Thanks for chiming in, Wendy, and I hope that helps, Lauren. Good.
It does. Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah. Joel, let's hear from you.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to, looking at the mural, I appreciate the, having the ability to weigh in now and feedback form on what is of interest to the RPAG on kind of an individual topic basis. But one thing that I think I'm interested in having a better understanding of is what the overall kind of modeling approach is, where the inputs for one or the outputs from one model might lead into the inputs of another model, what order things are happening in, is there iteration going on? The sort of, devils in the details kind of look at how does one process lead into another, and even, what modeling tools are being used and what kind of goals are built into those modeling tools and objective functions are driving the outputs of those tools. So that's not maybe a specific topic like the ones in these bubbles show, but it sounds like a lot of work is going into the front end. As Philip mentioned, this ISP is not a nimble thing, but it requires a lot to happen at the front end. And I just want to make sure that we have a view, especially in this more technical group, of the process and some of the details around it that some folks here who are who work in models might bring some value to the process. Yeah.
Thanks, Joel. Any responses, Jen?
Yeah, I can answer a little bit more high level probably than you care for at the moment, but it's a good question and call out. So based on the timeline, we're not proposing any software changes across planning at this point, because we just wouldn't hit that January 1st filing date. But that's why there's such an importance and emphasis on that upfront work, because if we align our inputs and assumptions upfront, all of the models for the different teams are, built to answer the questions of which they need to for their specific planning functions. And for example, electric T&D is really built to ensure it's reliable and safe and going to meet the various FERC compliance requirements. And so if we all assume the same things, input the same load forecasts, etc., then in theory, the outputs should all be aligned because we're all marching towards the same assumptions, and then our plans would be consistent at the end, but they wouldn't be one collective model because we're solving for different things for different reasons, and we have different requirements for each area. But I anticipate that those details that you're asking for, Joel, will definitely come in time as we start diving into these different topics within the RPAG framework. So I don't have specifics for you today, but hopefully that kind of helps where we're going at this point.
Thanks, Jen. Was there anything else you wanted to share before we, fully focus on the discussion with RPAG members?
No, that's it for me.
Okay. Well, stay close. I'm sure there'll be questions. So, Will, if I could ask you to switch to the mural board rather than the deck. Thank you. And if you could zoom in on the topics section, so the left-hand section of the board, there we go. And probably getting pretty close there. I wanted to start reading where I'm seeing some enthusiasm come from you all about what topics to focus on. I think you've gotten the sense that this is, the kitchen sink, but you have to kind of pick and choose if you don't want to just spend all day, every day with me in these meetings. So the things that are coming to the surface now are under constraints and targets, compliance obligations. Under alternate customer strategies, the conservation potential assessment, that CPA, targeted electrification. Under demand forecast for each customer strategy, support for just kind of the system and geographical look at electric and gas. Under the gas system integrity, the non-pipe alternatives had some interest. For the geographic electric and gas system supply investments, aligning with the distributed energy resources and the demand response opportunities, and alignment with targeted electrification opportunities. There's also just support around the utility scale generation investments. So that's what we've seen so far. But please, come on camera, come off of mute. You can either, I see some that I missed down there. There's a lot of support around resource adequacy, the utility scale resources, and maybe even perhaps some interest around customer strategy scenarios. So now how about come on camera, come off the mute, and you can either speak to the topics that you've indicated some interest around or suggest some new ones. Y'all are a real positive bunch. I haven't seen anyone express why is this on the screen? Why would I care? Emoji. So who would like to speak to what they've added or what they plan on adding? Kate, anyone? I'm just picking you because you came on camera first, but you don't have to speak.
Yeah, hi, Sophie. I have a comment, and I'm not sure if folks will agree with this. I guess I'm just spitballing. So for Renewable Northwest, there are a lot of things on here that are not relevant to us that we do not have expertise in. Electric vehicles is one of them. Major things about the gas system is another one. We specialize in the electric grid. I'm wondering if PSE is continuing a model of expecting that, the RPAG, we all come to every meeting about every topic, and that's what we have attempted to do so far. But if the scope of this is this broad, is there kind of a consideration that, more relevant topics, certain RPAG members would attend and others would not? This isn't me trying to get out of meetings so much as with the massive scope of information here, I'm just trying to see how we can make it feasible for everyone involved.
Yeah. Kara, any reactions?
I don't know if I have a definitive answer for you, Kate, but I think it's a really great suggestion sort of embedded in your question. As we broaden the scope, how can we do this in a way that makes sense? So we'll think about that some more as we continue to gather feedback from this conversation and others on what are the range of topics and where do our different RPAG members fall in terms of their expertise, and try to bring forward some ideas on what might make sense. So thank you for bringing that up.
And I see Lauren appreciates that question in the chat. Yeah, Lauren, please.
And I'm going to sort of also state like the flip side of Kate's question, which is, given the broadened scope, there might also be folks who, for example, are more interested in transportation electrification than they would be in like a broader ISP process or the IRP, et cetera, who wouldn't otherwise participate on the RPAG, but definitely want to have input into anything having to do with transportation electrification. So, all of this is to say, I think it does point to the need to kind of think through the RPAG structure a little bit more. How do we make sure that the folks who want to engage on all of these topics have the opportunity to do so in a constructive way? And, I think it's like a double-edged sword a little bit. I mean, on the one hand, you're trying to streamline the process by expanding the scope. But on the other hand, we don't want to leave folks out of the conversation on any of these topics. So just want to express that view. Thank you.
I can tell the engagement team at PSE, their ears are perking up because they're going to be the ones working on that engagement strategy, I think due in October or this fall, somewhere there. So
yep.
Thanks for that.
And I think I would add, this is complicated stuff and there's lots of interactions that we don't anticipate. I think for everybody, including myself, there'll be parts of the discussion that, feel unfamiliar, but I would encourage everybody to try and come to all the meetings and remain engaged, certainly Renewable Northwest, because the interactions among these things are that's what's new here. And I think it's a great opportunity to look at the whole system in a more holistic way and to think about creative solutions. And, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very complicated, but I think we'll all learn a lot. And I think it's, I hope it'll be a national model for how to solve some of these problems that are inherently interrelated.
Yeah, well said. Jim, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess just sort of while we're discussing, potential tweaks to the procedure for RPAG meetings and sort of ways to make sure that all the interested folks are able to, share their thoughts. One of the topics, that's been discussed with this RPAG process is opportunities for more robust public participation in RPAG meetings, and folks that were not able to join the formal group, but that remain interested. And so I think as PSE is considering potential tweaks to the process, being attentive to those opportunities to center public participation would be valuable. Thanks.
Thanks for the comment, Jim. So shifting our focus to these topics, does anyone want to talk a little bit about why they put a thumbs up next to one of these? Yeah, Freud, please.
Oh, hi everyone. It is my understanding and sort of my feeling from our discussion and from what I understand about the resource planning from the IRP process, that a big part of the decision on investing on something, or where do we head, is in are we going to meet resource adequacy? Are we going to have enough capacity? Are we going to are we going to be reliable in the future? Now, with the sort of, I'm imagining this system as like merging of these two pipelines of gas and electric. And I'm imagining, and from our discussion, I think our last discussion, we had a conversation about different definitions for what reliability means for the gas and for the electric system. I think that those conversations about resource adequacy and reliability might be pretty interesting, and that's why I put those kind of thumbs up in those areas, mostly on the middle column of the electricity system planning. because hosting capacity, non-wire alternatives, which may be batteries or other things, and then at the bottom as well, resource adequacy might be a little bit extra complicated with if you're taking like a more holistic view, which I completely support. Just kind of want to voice support from what other folks have been saying as well. This is really excited, but I'm definitely interested in how that will change. I feel like you have two different teams in the past, doing gas and electric reliability. How is that gonna merge? I don't know. I'm very interested in this, and I think it will deserve a good amount of focus.
I think you're asking all the questions that PSE might be asking themselves too. Thank you for talking through your interest in that middle column there. Anybody else want to speak up and talk about what they would like to focus on? Why you selected what you selected? Okay. I know a number of you want a moment and to spend time with the feedback report to put more thoughts into this. But if any of the visiting elephants or goats or bees would like to speak up now before turning our thoughts to challenges and opportunities. Okay.
I will admit that I put a thumbs up next to targeted, one of the places where it mentions targeted electrification. See somebody in the other area, just because I think it is so incredibly important and complicated. And I think it's one of those areas where, as we know already, there's going to be pushback. It has to be done and discussed very carefully. I think equity is complicated in that area, and so, but I sure hope it's part of the planning process because it's necessary to meet the aggressive climate goals.
Yeah. Thanks, Ezra, for unpacking that. I feel like complicated and important are two themes we're hearing over and over. Okay. Well, continue adding your thumbs or your confused faces, but we're going to transfer over to the right-hand side of the board. So Will, if you want to shift. And Will, if I could ask you just to be a live scribe as well, the invitation to build upon what Jen had previously talked about in terms of the opportunities and those challenges. And maybe I'll make it easy on you. I'll just put in a screenshot of what she already talked about. Did anyone else have any big picture opportunities or challenges that you haven't spoken to already? Will, if I can just summarize a little bit of what I heard, maybe a challenge here is how to focus RPAG members' attention around their expertise. That was something that came up in the beginning. The flip side of that is the opportunities side, which is how can RPAG members' expertise intersect in this intersectional document, that piece. So there's some things I've heard from you this afternoon so far. Anybody want to put voice to some? I think I heard 3 or 4 of you use the word excited. That kind of lies in the opportunity side, but I also heard, a sense of being daunted as well. Anyone else want to chime in here?
How about as a challenge that we remarkably haven't really been talking about at all, which is maintaining affordability for customers as we address all of these many goals, and making sure that that's fundamental remains. It used to be the number one part of the planning process, meet requirements at lowest cost.
That's great. And I see that Summer, you second that. So I'm going to add a little plus sign there in your honor right there. I saw that someone wrote bandwidth and time constraints of RPAG members if meetings are increased. think that is something that PSE is thinking about. The word bandwidth coming up again. Oh, Will, I'm sorry. I'm just reading aloud what's just to the left of where you're typing, so I'm sorry to confuse you. Someone's typing about streamlining processes. It looks like it's a visiting goat there. Does someone want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is Freud, the visiting
Yeah.
goat. I think that it is an opportunity to combine adjacent or parallel processes across these two different parts of the business, the gas and electric parts, and we ask similar questions twice, or we have asked and answered similar questions twice in previous RPAG meetings that obviously have a slightly different answers because the two different systems are operated and planned differently. But I think that now we have potentially the opportunity to ask it once. And I think this is an opportunity. Maybe it will maybe be more difficult, but maybe also less time. I don't know. That's a little bit hard to imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that was well put. So staying on the kind of opportunity side, serving a national model of integrated climate-directed planning. I think I saw an elephant over there. Anyone want to share, put a few more words to that one?
Well, I guess I'm the elephant.
You're the elephant in the room.
Elephant in the Zoom, as they say.
Yeah.
I just think that is what we're doing here. I mean, this isn't just about Washington. This is about this is innovative and important. And I obviously, if Washington is a leader in doing this right and making it affordable and effective, then that is incredibly important nationally. So just so we all know what we're doing here.
Yeah. Ezra, we might have to pull up that sticky note when things get really tricky down the road, is remembering the why.
They will.
Yeah. So I'm also seeing opportunities for non-RPAG member input on topics of expertise. This is similar to what Jim was saying before, I think. Jim, was that you or is that someone else?
That was not me.
Oh, okay. So someone else is echoing you. Does someone want to speak to what they had in mind around non-RPAG member input? All right. If you're feeling shy this afternoon, we can move around the board here. So someone else talked about unifying PSE's equity approach company-wide. So the approach for our RFPs can be really different. Would someone want to speak to that a little bit more?
Oh, that's also me.
Nice. Go ahead, Kate.
I think Renewable Northwest mentioned this in our feedback on the equity approach. So I was just putting it in here as well, that the company uses a different scoring model and for their RFP selection, which we totally understand the differences. But as we look towards looking at the gas system, looking at the electric system, integrating these, just trying to find ways to sync up how the company is scoring equity across its entire processes, rather than siloing it, if that's possible.
Yeah, thanks for that. I saw that the visiting owl talked about meeting the 2030 standards. Somebody else already liked that. Anyone want to elaborate on that one?
Well, that was Lauren. I'm the visiting owl. I think, yeah, I mean, there's a long way to go to meet the 2030 standards. And, I think we just got to get have all of us, I'm not just talking about PSE here, everybody focused on how are we going to actually achieve those goals. And, planning is important. And I think planning is sort of a first step and a very critical step, but we are also in the process of implementing these laws in order to meet those 2030 targets. And so I think we want to make sure that the focus remains on meeting the targets, even while we're also doing all of this other long-term planning work.
Yeah, thanks for that. And while you have the mic, I see that you're writing out a thought about the integration between long-term planning and PSE's financial ... on the challenge side. Do you want to talk more about that one?
Yeah, sure. I think what I'm trying to get at here is, I feel like an ISP presents a great opportunity to just be a lot more relevant than the sort of siloed planning processes that maybe don't rise, necessarily to the level of like fitting within the company's long-term strategic vision and strategic plan. And so I think what I was trying to get at here is, I think an ISP has the ability to encompass a lot more of the company's goals as it pertains to staying, financially viable and sort of what it wants to be, in 10 years, 20 years. Just given that we're sort of starting with a blank slate here, I would like to, make sure that we're working towards a plan that is relevant to the board and is, demonstrative of where PSE is headed as a company.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. So we have a little under 5 minutes left just to flesh out these opportunities and challenges. So I'll just open the door to anyone who maybe hasn't spoken yet today. If you want to just talk about what's on your mind. How are you daunted? How are you excited? Okay. All right. I'm not seeing any new, I think we've touched on most of, if not all of the sticky notes here. I'm just kind of looking around the room. I see someone's writing a little bit about putting customers at the center of planning. I think that was Lauren with her OWL alias. That's an opportunity there. Thanks for that. All right, opening it up to everyone, whether you've talked or haven't talked yet today. Any final words before we move into wrap-up mode? Well, thank you all. Sometimes, I'm a person and word kind of gal, and so having these kind of big picture opportunities and challenges in that theoretical sense is really interesting and intriguing to me. So thanks for spelling all that out. Will, if you could go back to the slide deck now, just so that people can see the next steps visually. So as he is doing that, we're going to be on slide 30. Yeah, there we go. So I think that there was an issue around the feedback form, that there isn't a July 17 drop down. Sorry about that. So just note that you can select kind of general feedback from the drop down menu. It all goes to the same people. It all goes to the same place, but apologies for that confusion. So just choose general feedback and get your thoughts in by July 24th. You all can take a breather in August. You won't have to hear my voice for a whole month, but you'll get back together in September. We are not sure of the date at this moment. It was originally slated for September 11th, and then thought, people might have different ways of commemorating that day. Can we find a different date? So Kim, can I ask you in the chat to host and panelists to drop the doodle link in there? I know everyone loves a good doodle poll. If I could ask you to fill it out now on the spot, so I don't need to have to call you later. Let us know which of those dates in early September works best for you for another RPAG meeting. And my understanding is that meeting, PSE will know a little bit more at that time. There'll be more information, and this can all start feeling a little bit more real. And then just a note, October 31st, PSE will file their engagement plan. And I know the engagement team took good notes today about what you were saying about focusing people's time. So with that, I think we're just on time for public comment. So Kim, can I ask you to allow the hand raising feature to come on for participants. There's about 11 attendees who are interested in speaking. Fantastic. We see Jim Adcock, Don Marsh. Let's see if there's a third so I can balance the time. Thomas Kramer, very good. I will turn it over and it's my turn to share my screen with our timer. Give me a moment here. Jim, are you able to talk? Let's see if we can hear you.
Can I, do you hear me?
We sure can. Yeah, your 2 minutes starts now.
Thank you. The dog ate my homework again. I'm expressing concerns about what by now has become a pattern of delays in Puget's efforts to meet CETA requirements, which initially is to actually be 80% clean, 80% renewable energy delivered to customer load by 2030, where Puget starts an IRP process, but then cancels it, and this happens over and over again. And by CETA law, only the remaining 20% made net near zero by some other form of alternate compliance. I am concerned that Puget is not planning to do this, to actually be 80% clean delivered to customer load by 2030. And Puget throws away the time and effort of everybody who has been involved in the IRP and RPAG process over and over again. RPAG is a sad joke when even those which Puget handpicked to represent the public, which of course they do not, but then even those people do not actually show up at the RPAG meetings, leaving the public represented by exactly nobody. I will note Puget started back in 2020 by foot dragging on acquiring new additional renewables, claiming that these technologies would become cheaper later in time. But now, when instead renewables have become more expensive, now Puget claims they cannot implement new renewables because they are too expensive. And then Puget claims that BPA needs to build new power lines, which won't happen until after 2030, too late. When Puget knew about this problem was developing a dozen years ago and could have asked Puget BPA for transmission lines back then. And Puget has good solar and wind resources in their own territory, no BPA required. But now Puget is stuck in the mud, predicting they will make no progress for several years. In summary, I can't imagine any other outcome than Puget will hit the 2030 wall without actually meeting the CETA 80% requirements. Please note my concerns. What is happening is not right and is in no way just and reasonable. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Jim. Appreciate that. Next, we have Dawn. Let's make sure Dawn's able to talk.
Can you hear me?
We sure can, Dawn. Your 2 minutes start now.
Yeah, I want to support Laura McCoy's comment about getting customers involved in the planning process. So, as you know, many of us have stuck through this sort of dry spell of not being able to really engage in these RPAG meetings. But we still have a lot of enthusiasm. We think this is very important work, and now with ISP, even more important. And it's also a really great opportunity for PSE to look at public engagement, public participation, and really embrace a broader vision. We've got a broader scope now. We need broader participation to make sure this really works. PSE and its customers have to work together to make this work. And if you're not allowing customers to really participate, there may be holes in the project, in the plan, or there might be insights that you miss. So one thing is, I think in the past, maybe there was some nervousness about people abusing the process or hijacking meetings or stuff. But now we've had 4 years of experience with Zoom and remote meetings. I really do think that with reasonable moderation policies, that if somebody is abusing, you can say, okay, that's not really helping, and you can unmute that person if necessary. But there are voices out in the community that you do not want to mute. You do not want to miss the opportunities, the wisdom that's embodied in this community. So I do hope that we will see opportunities for us to participate more than just 2 minutes at the very end of the meeting with no possible Q&A possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for your comments, Don. So I'm looking at the list here. It seems like the hand was removed from someone else who maybe wanted to speak. Oh, there it comes back again. Thomas Kramer, please. Can we hear you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Sure can. Your 2 minutes start now.
Okay. Tom Kramer with Third Act Washington here. PSE's Planning Transition Work Plan and the slides today suggest that the primary goal of utility integration is to make the resource planning process more efficient. And I'm encouraged by PSE's verbal commitments today more toward decarbonization and customer needs. However, the first listed purpose of the Decarbonization Act, as stated in the first sentence of legislative intent in section 1.5, is, quote, to transition customers off of the direct use of fossil fuels, close quote. The only direct use of fossil fuels offered by the utility is gas. Transitioning off gas is the primary goal. Reducing gas is not enough. PSE is required to transition off of it. Proportional emission reduction in 2050 will be net zero for everybody. So there needs to be a progressive reduction that over time that at least approaches proportional along the way, including progressive decommissioning of gas plant through geographically targeted electrification. And now on slide 16, as noted on the slide, there are other specific requirements for HB 1589 than the 6 quoted there. In fact, there are over 20 additional specific requirements for the ISP. I'd like to emphasize to the RPAG that several of the requirements include detailed assessments of various renewable alternatives, conservation and efficiency resources, supply side resources, DERs, and other resources that may be available. These assessments are more granular than the usual resource assessments made at the planning level and should result in fewer assumptions in developing scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments as well. Very good. I'm not seeing any more raised hands from the public, but thank you to the observers for taking in the meeting and watching PSE and RPAG members evolve as they respond to new legislation here. So we're just about at 3 o'clock. So I'll just wrap by saying thank you so much to the RPAG members who gave a lot of their thoughts and ideas during this meeting, and to PSE for putting together materials to help get the ball rolling. So I hope everyone enjoys the breather in August, and we look forward to seeing you in September. Take care, everyone.